absolventky. Přednáškovou část letošního absolventského velehradu 2019 otevřeme povídáním s hostem velice vzácným, v skutku hostem nejpovolanějším. Jsme nadšení, že mezi nás dorazila Jeho Excelence Mons Daniel Balvo, prodloužená ruka papeže za hranicemi Vatikánu, novopočený apoštolský Nuncius v České republice, pátý v řadě od roku 1990, vyslanec Svatého stolce a titulární arcibiskup kastelský, absolvent kanonického práva, který svůj život strávil v nejrůznějších končinách země. Dnes se s námi podělí o své zkušenosti z diplomatických služeb Vatikánu v Ghaně, Ekvádoru, Chile, České republice, Jordánsku a Litvě, i specifika práce Nuncia na Novém Zélandu, Cookových ostrovech, ostrovech Fidži, Marshallových ostrovech, Kiribati, ve federativních státech Mikronésie, Náhoru, Palau, na ostrově Samoa, Tongu, Vanuatu, Kenii a Sudánu.
Jižní Sudán.
Pokud budete mít vy také otázky na svého Nuncia, můžete se zeptat buď přímo, nejlépe v anglickém jazyce, a nebo tady bude kolovat košíček s možností dotazů. A až do 5:30, kdy pan Nuncius pokorně odjede zpět do Prahy na oslavy kardinála Berana, si s ním můžete zakonverzovat anglicky, italsky, španělsky, francouzsky, but you have to be very careful because he speaks and understands Czech too.
I'll tell you, I read Czech very well. Speaking conversation, still I'm working on it.
From now, the discussion will be held in our dear guest mother tongue. Your Excellency, we are extremely grateful you are able to attend our event.
Yes.
Could you please, not everyone of us has the pleasure or ability to meet Papal Nuncio, so could you please clarify to us what Nuncius actually does?
All right. This is hot. Let's see. There we go. You can hear me. Although in my work, sometimes I have been in places where there are no microphones, especially in Africa and in the Pacific Islands. So I can speak loud when I have to. I don't need the microphone. But it's probably better that I use it. I also have my phone here, but not because I'm expecting any phone calls, but I'm counting how many steps I walk every day. It's good for my health, and the phone has this application already installed. So it's not that I understand that I have nieces and nephews who are in their 20s. They are, I will explain a bit, and they always are, this is like another member of their body, you see, so. But I would like to say, first of all, that I am grateful for your invitation. Maria, she sent an email and asked if I would be interested in coming to the absolvent, to your meeting. And obviously I said yes, because I am here. Just before I left Nairobi, I met with a similar group of people. They're just beginning an initiative in the Archdiocese of Nairobi of having regular meetings of young people in their 20s and 30s who have already finished school, some of whom already have families, but the purpose was to create an opportunity for young people, young adults, many of whom have university degrees and studies. They are people who are already working, and to have a spiritual initiative, an opportunity for young people to be able to meet and to develop their spirituality, but also to make their contribution to the church. Because although Africa is different, Nairobi is different, but many of the young people, they are the same as you are in the sense that they have degrees, they've studied, they're very good at these things. Nairobi is it's a developed city in a certain sense, so there are plenty of opportunities. And they all have the same questions about life, about their future, about their vocation, about their contribution to what it is they're going to do. So I had only just begun to meet with them, and I celebrated a Mass with a group of them, but unfortunately on that very same, not unfortunately, it's just a fact, that on the same day that I met with them and celebrated a big Mass was the day that I was announced as to be transferred and to leave Kenya and to come here to the Czech Republic. So I had to say sorry that I couldn't continue with this, to be somehow in a relationship with them. So when you sent the invitation, and I looked at my schedule and I was free for this weekend, I thought it would be a good thing for the same reason, to be able to engage with people, young people who are already finished studies, who are working, who are already making a contribution to where they are, to whatever profession, whatever work you are in, but also in where you live, parishes that you might belong to, places that, or activities in which you are engaged, church activities that you already you are involved and committed in making a contribution. So, since part of what I do is to see the life of the church in a country, not just the life of the bishops, but everyone, as much as I can, I thought it would be a good thing to accept this invitation to come and to spend some time with you. I will say there's a little bit of a životopis in the little booklet that you have. I was born in Brooklyn, in the city of New York, but like many families in the 1950s, we moved out of the city. We went to a suburb about 50 kilometers to the northwest. The place is called Suffern. And as a result, we moved out of the Diocese of Brooklyn into the Archdiocese of New York. And that was the place for which I was ordained. I went to Catholic school, to our seminary. I went to Rome for theology studies and was ordained in 1976. My family background, I'm the oldest of 5 children. I had one brother who is already deceased. I have 3 sisters. In June, I will celebrate my 68th birthday. So I'm not as young as I used to be. So I have one sister, she's 65, so she has 3 children, 9 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. And then my 2 younger sisters were both married in 93, so they have children who are your age. One sister, 25, 23, 21. The other is 21, 22, and 17. My father is still alive. He's 97 years old. My mother, she had cancer. She died already in 93. So we are of Irish background, mostly. My mother's parents were born in Ireland. But on my father's side, his grandfather was born in the province of Agrigento in Sicily. So that's what I said. I am a little bit mafioso in my, He was a shoemaker, and he was only 12 years old when he came to America, so I don't think he was involved in the mafia in any event. And he married Irish, so mostly of Irish. His wife was of Irish origin, so I never knew him. He died long before I was born. So that is my background. But both my parents were orphans, really. My mother's parents were deceased before she was 20. My father lost his mother right after birth, so for my parents, they were not connected to their ethnic origin. Sometimes people in the United States are very much connected with wherever they came from. They follow Irish traditions or Italian traditions or Polish, or I know that there are people of Czech origin in the Midwest and Texas, and some of them still keep up the language. My parents were not particularly attached to whatever their ethnic origin was. The thing that was most important for them was our Catholic identity. So That's why we went to Catholic school. The parishes have, in the United States, parish schools. And then I was rather young, but among the things you talk about are vocations, but to be a priest is really the only thing I ever wanted to do. I didn't want to be, say, an engineer, or the only other thing is, you know, in Prague you have the metro. New York we call it the subway. And I really like trains, so maybe if I weren't a priest, I would be a metro or a train engineer, you know, driving the trains or the metros. I like things on rails, but really, it's the only thing I ever really wanted to do. So I went into the seminary as young as you can, which is in high school, 9th grade, a good long time ago. So after ordination, I had 2 parish assignments. And then in New York, one was an Italian parish, the other was a very large American parish, about 800 kilometers north of New York City. Then I was asked to do further studies at Catholic University of America in canon law, and when I was finishing that is when I was asked to join the diplomatic service of the Holy See, which I knew about since I had studied in Rome, and I actually have 2 classmates who were in it, one who left and returned to the diocese, the other is from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. He is the Apostolic Nuncio in Switzerland. So I knew about it, and without going into a long story, I mean, the Pope for centuries has ambassadors. That's what we are, the Holy Father, and there used to be one time the Papal States. So our history is very much, since I am in Europe, is very much tied up with all European history, all of the relationships between the religious authority, the temporal authority, church, state, kingdoms, and all, the relationships between all of the royal families, the ambassadors that each would send to each other. That's our history is part of that. So the Pope, the Holy Father, has had ambassadors for over 500 years, sending them to different places. But for the most part, it was very much centered here in Europe. Then afterwards, in the 20th century, to when much of Africa, much of Asia, much of Latin America were colonies of England or France or Spain or Portugal, and when they become independent, they also have a relationship with the Vatican, with the Holy See. So that's what I entered with. It's a service. It's a diplomacy. It is the embassy, if you will, of the Holy Father, and there are more than 100 in the world. We are a big service from that point of view in the number of missions. Small in the fact that we just deal with mostly with church things. When you go to an embassy, you will have cultural and commercial and political office, consular, dealing with visas and passports and things like that, which we do not do. So I decided, I accepted. So I returned to Rome and finished my doctorate degree in canon law. And then I started my service in 1987. It's 32 years. In West Africa, Ghana, we also covered Togo and Benin. Then I did 2 posts in South America, in Ecuador and in Chile. And when I was in Chile, I received do any of you know Italian? The Italian language, qualcuno che parla italiano. Because the word in Italian for blind is cieco. The word for a Czech person is cieco. So we were watching a football match between Germany and the Czech Republic. It was a European Cup of some sort, and the Nuncio was Italian and the sisters were Italian, and we were saying, well, how can these Ciechi play? Because they are Ciechi. How can they play? They're blind. The very next day, I received my transfer to the Czech Republic. Yes? So, that was 96. The Nuncio sent me one of these little books in English, Teach Yourself Czech, the language, so that I could already start to learn, because when I arrived here, which was some months later in September, it was expected that I already would begin at our Mass in the chapel to read the Gospel in Czech. So very quickly, I had to learn to read the language, and since me personally, I enjoy language study. I speak Italian, I had studied some French, and I learned Spanish when I was in South America. So I was always curious about Slavic languages, so I wanted to learn one, and I got the chance. So I was here then for 3 years, from 1996 to 99, in Prague. The nuncio at that time was an older man, this Italian, Giovanni Coppa, who retired and has since died, in fact. I only came here to Belehrad once during that period, and I really didn't remember it. So now I will have a better memory, and I will be back in July because there is the pilgrimage, and then the bishops have one of their meetings during that period. And then when I left here, I went to the Middle East, to Jordan, tried to learn Arabic, but Arabic is even more difficult because you have to learn the alphabet first of all. Then you read from right to left. I spent 3 years there. While I was here in 1997, Pope John Paul II made his third visit to the Czechoslovakia, Czech Republic, to Prague and Hradec Králové, and was my first experience at that, so it was helpful since in the year 2000, when I was in Jordan, my first year, Pope John Paul II, for the great jubilee of the year 2000, was visiting places connected with people. So he wanted to go to Iraq to visit Ur for Abraham, but he couldn't. But he went to Sinai, then the Holy Land, starting in Jordan, then across to Israel and the Palestinian territories. And later on, he went to Syria and to Greece to honor St. Paul. So I had being alone in Amman, because the nuncio lived in Iraq, in Baghdad. It was a lot of work. And then after I went to Vilnius, we covered the 3 Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. And when I was finished on the 1st of April, which is April Fool's Day, I was appointed nuncio to New Zealand. Pope John Paul II was dying, so they were on that day, 1st and 2nd of April, the last appointments of bishops and some nuncios, and I was one of them. So there were 20 territories to which I was responsible as nuncio, dealt to in the Pacific Islands. So it's better to take a globe rather than a flat map, because when you take the globe and you see where Palau is and you see where French Polynesia is, you see the distances that were covered. And New Zealand is in the first time zone. So the time difference between here and Wellington now is 12 hours. And then on the other side is the date line. So I would have travels. If I went to Samoa, I would arrive 20 hours before I left. Yes, because I would say if I leave on Friday, I would arrive there on Thursday. And then when I would come back, say if I leave on Friday, I fly right over Saturday and arrive on Sunday because of the 23-hour time distance between New Zealand and Samoa. So there were little tricks like that. So in 2013, I was appointed nuncio to Kenya in early 2013, and then also the permanent observer to the United Nations offices in Nairobi. You are aware that the UN has its major office in New York. It has a second major office in Geneva for UN agencies. And Nairobi is the 3rd largest UN station because you have Environment Program, which is, as you can imagine, with climate change, is an important program, and also human settlements. At the end of the year, December 2013, I was appointed as the first nuncio to South Sudan, which had become independent in 2011, but I was living in Nairobi. And I could go on forever about that, but South Sudan, the week before I was appointed, entered into a very brutal civil war, which still in some way continues. So I had that responsibility, and then, as I said, in September of this last year, was appointed nuncio here back to the Czech Republic, and arrived in November. My predecessor was Italian, retired, and went back to Italy in March, so the post was vacant. And then the fact that I had been here before and had learned the Czech language, takes some time to become fluent. It put me in the possibility of being appointed. So I was, and I was very happy to return here. I loved it the first time I was here for so many things. Getting to meet the people, getting to learn the language, getting to know the culture, the country, the music. You can go to a concert every single day in Prague. So many cultural opportunities, and just to walk around, go for walks, which I do for exercise. And there's so many different places to go. So I was very happy to come back. And I arrived in November and started my work. And since then, I've been going to all sorts of things. Now, the next question is, what do we do? That's a little bit about who I am. Certainly, as I mentioned at the very beginning, what a nuncio was related very much to European history and being the ambassadors that royal families and kings would send to each other. But as is the modern understanding of what it is the name in itself, apostolic nuncius, nuncio in English. It comes from the word apostolic, of course, that anything in the church, one holy Catholic apostolic. And then nuncius is simply the Latin word for being sent, an announcer, a proclaimer. From in the English word announce, it's the same root, the English and other Latin languages. So I am the messenger, if you will, of the Holy Father. I started my service when Pope John Paul II was Pope, and then Benedict, and now Pope Francis. I had the opportunity when Pope Francis, a little more than 3 years ago, in November 2015, wanted to visit the Central African Republic, which, if you look it up on the internet, you will find that it too has been in the throes of very much problems of civil war. It's a country that is one of the poorest country I have been to, the Central African Republic, on one occasion. It's one of the poorest countries in the world. You cannot imagine the kind of poverty that is in places like this. And they were also fighting war between the Christians and the Muslims. The Christians are the majority, and they were the aggressors, actually, against the Muslims in the Central African Republic. It's a big country with a small population. But the Holy Father wanted to visit there because Pope Francis also likes to visit places that are in difficulty. So then the idea was to come to visit, other than that, Nairobi, Kampala, the capital of Uganda, and Bangui, the capital of the Central African Republic. So at the end of November 2015, Pope Francis visited. So he stayed. The nunciature is essentially his house. I'm just an administrator, a bit of a caretaker. So I had the privilege to stay to live with him for 2 days. He stays with us, and then you have the various people in the papal party stay in different places, and the journalists. So to spend some time with Pope Francis, to listen to what he has to say, although at the meal times for him it's a time to relax in a certain sense. But I also had the opportunity to share with him certain concerns, especially about South Sudan, and the hope that he would be able to visit, which hopefully he can still do. So what I am is to be, in a certain sense, the voice of the Holy Father, the presence of the Holy Father in the countries to which I'm sent. And it's a mutual relationship because one of the things if you wish, really from the Gospels, that the St. Peter was given the task of strengthening his brothers and sisters, so that's one of the things that the Holy Father seeks to do, is to be this center of unity for everyone in the church. And this is a particular form in which we do that. There are so many other different ways that the Holy Father is in contact with the church. You know, in the past, before modern transportation and modern communications, it was very difficult, but now bishops can regularly speak to the Holy Father. You have World Youth Days, the International Youth Days, when you go to, like Panama was the most recent one, some of you have gone. I went to the one in 2008 in Sydney because for us it was a neighbor. For most people you think of going to Australia, wow, that isn't so far away. But for us in New Zealand, that's our neighbor. So if any of you have ever been to Sydney, to Australia, and you think of New Zealand, it's 3 more hours flying time this way and 2 more hours time distance, so it's a bit far. So it's one of the ways that the Holy Father also is able to interact with people through these opportunities, which didn't happen before, things like World Youth Days. So that is much of what I do. It's to be a person who, there's obviously, there's office work. I mean, a fair amount of my time is correspondence, is writing about the life of the church. And then, I'm asked from our offices to be in contact with people. So I attend the bishops' meetings, for example, I attend meetings of the religious superiors. One of my most important tasks is that the nuncio is the person who is responsible for the process of the appointment of bishops. So when I was in Kenya, there were a number of bishops, some who had retired, some unfortunately untimely deaths due to illness. So when I left there were many of these processes that were underway. When I arrived here, I noticed, I was immediately informed there was great interest about the future of the Archbishop of Prague. Because Cardinal Duca, he reached 75 last year. When I was here the first time, he was appointed Bishop of Hradec Králové. But all the bishops in the Czech part have all been changed. Here in Moravia, they are the same. Archbishop Graudner is still in Olomouc, Bishop Cikole in Brno, and Bishop Lokovic in Ostrava Opava, but they will be changed in coming years because all 3 of them are now more than 7 years of age. So I have been asked from a number of sides, including political, about the future of the Archbishop of Prague. So at the moment, since Pope Francis asked Cardinal Duca to remain, which is not unusual for a cardinal, because, for example, where I left, the Archbishop in Nairobi is also 75 this year. But he's in extremely good health, so the Holy Father will ask him to stay. If you are ill, the Pope would be inclined to accept the resignation as well, as soon as you present it. But in other cases, especially dealing with someone who is a cardinal, the Holy Father is inclined to leave the person for a few more years. So when I finally get the word from Rome that the Holy Father would like to accept the cardinal's resignation, then I begin the process. So then I consult with the bishops, with priests, religious, lay leaders to who are possible candidates, and then to proceed with that to present to the Holy Father possible candidates for appointment. But that's for every diocese. So that's things being in Prague, and as I said, from a number of political sides, people are interested in knowing with whom they are going to be dealing, since there is a certain relationship, closeness, if you will, between the government and the Church, the importance of the Archbishop of Prague in history. So that is one of the things that I do. And so it's one of the reasons why I accepted the invitation to come here. Pope Francis is one who, he just recently published the document after the World Youth Day, which I had a chance. One of the things about traveling by train is it gives me time to read. If you're driving, it's a little hard. So I have always loved trains. Even as a child, I had model trains, toy trains. So, and when I was here in Europe the first time in the 1970s, people, I mean, now you have all these budget airlines, you can fly almost anywhere, but traveling by air at that time in Europe was very, very expensive and not convenient. And for us students, we were normally going from center, Rome to Vienna, Rome to Paris, Rome to someplace, city to city. So the most convenient was to go by rail, by train. There were none of the fast trains. So say going from Rome to Vienna was 18, 19, 20 hours, Paris or Brussels, 24, 25 hours in the train. So I arrived in Europe when I was 21 years old. So these were things that I enjoyed, and now that I go all over, I've been to almost a number of times, Kosovo, all by train. Now that I have grown in age, I have a Prukaz senior, so now I can ride the metro and the tramway, Zdarma. And I have Velko Slevu for the train. So I accept it, Pope Francis sees in young people, no, you're not high school students, you're already people who finished studies, you're involved in your work, you're in your careers, you're in your life. Some of you, I understand that some of you are already married, some have families. So that the Holy Father sees in young people not just the future, but the present. That the things are going to change, because when I was meeting with the young people in Nairobi, an unfortunate aspect of life in Africa are tribal differences and a very serious problem of corruption. That a country like Kenya, which has so many possibilities, so many riches in the sense, resources, so many of the people are working poor. They work hard, but the salaries are very low, and you have this very small group of very, very wealthy people, they're rich, then a sort of a middle class, but so many people are working poor. And the country has so many possibilities, but it's all stolen. The politicians mostly, and others, business people, they steal. South Sudan is even worse. When they became independent, all the money was stolen. They put it in their pockets, bought themselves houses in other countries, and the poor people remain poor. So it's a serious problem. So one of the things I said to the young people, you're the ones that are going to do something about it. If you are following the teachings of Christ, if you are involved Christians, because very often, I'll be a bit blunt, that some of the people were all, they're on the ground praising Jesus, and then they're putting all the money in their pockets. So there was no correspondence between their life of prayer, shall we say, and their Christian life. So one of the things that I would, that I only had a short opportunity, but to say to the young people, you are working, you are in the world. So you are the ones who are going to help to overcome this problem. So here, changing the circumstances, if there are things to do in society, and every society has, its downside. This is a country where there is a good deal of well-being, but at the same time, when I'm in Napshikopye, you have the homeless people who are all gathering around. I've seen them under the train bridges. I must have a friendly face because there are old people who come up to me and they say, oh, can you give me some money? So there are social problems. There are things to be done, and there are changes that need to take place in the society and changes that come from our faith. So if these things are going to be happening, you are the ones who are doing them. So I, for that reason, thought it would be good to come and just to see, to listen, to see. But that's part of my, if you will, part of my my mission is to listen, to see what the different aspects of life in the church, the young people, lay people, the religious, the priests, the bishops as well. So this is my, I'm doing all the talking, so
you speak
I hope it's enough.
About the youth.
Yeah.
So let's get back to your childhood.
Yeah.
We know that there have been a lot of stars that were born in Brooklyn, such as comedian Eddie Murphy, writers Truman Capote or Barbara Streisand, or composer Aaron Copland, gangster Al Capone, but also a person, our dear guest, that has, by the way, his webpage on Wikipedia in 7 languages. You can check it there.
Okay.
You were raised in Brooklyn during the time of the golden age of America. So what are your childhood memories of the life of your family, your community?
Well, one thing is the list of people that you mentioned, all these famous people, some of whom have a lot of money. I don't know any of them. So people, well, you're from the United States, but I say, I do not know Bill Gates personally, so I cannot help you with any of those people, I was raised in a city. I was not raised on a farm, so I'm a city boy. I enjoyed life, and I enjoy cities as a result. Went to the local parish school. We walked everywhere. We didn't have a car. We took public transportation. New York City as a place, I was just a child there. And then growing up when I was in high school, our seminary high school is in Manhattan, which gave me a lot of opportunities to, I was 13, 14, 15, but still to enjoy being in the city of New York and seeing all the different, if you've ever been to a place like that, you see that you sit somewhere in Manhattan and you watch the world go by, because you see people of every race, every age, dressed all different ways, every language, who live and work in New York. So it's a very cosmopolitan kind of place where you have so many different people, so many different backgrounds. So I felt that has given me an opportunity to, since I have traveled a lot, also to appreciate all the different places in which I now have lived, because one of the things about going to all of these countries is to see how people live, how the church lives, the different histories. Africa, the Christian faith, the Catholic faith has been present for a little more than in sub-Saharan Africa for a little more than 100 years. Kenya this year will be 120 years. Here that's not, in this part of Europe, is nothing. Latin America here, Middle East, different lengths of time that the Christian faith, the Catholic Church, has been present, and different ways in which it has lived. So this all started with my experience of life in a place like New York, where you see people really from everywhere. I don't know if that answers some of it.
We are at a place that is connected somehow with Cyril and Methodius,
Yes.
that traveled thousands of miles to distant and unknown places all around the world to spread the Lord's gospel. You have been working in Holy Father service for 22 years. So, what are your memories from diverse places? What are your biggest memories from those corners of the world?
Well, I have also tried to, as much as I can, to do some pastoral work, to celebrate Mass in different places. So in Africa, when I was in Latin America, I went regularly to parishes on Sundays. I was not the Nuncius, so I had more freedom to do that. In other places, it wasn't always possible, but it was the kind of thing that enabled me to appreciate, especially what I liked most of all are the Masses, the liturgical celebrations. Because for me personally, what awakened in me the idea to become a priest was the Mass, was the liturgy, was going to Mass as a boy. I was a ministrant, I was a Mass server. we were able to go during Lent. We could go to daily Mass as children. The parish had a midday Mass during Lent, and I used to go. So that's where the idea for me to become a priest started. So it's one of the things that I have appreciated a great deal. And in the different countries, the different ways, the different traditions of worship that you find. Now, I have just come from Africa, where the tradition of worship is very lively. If you've ever seen, you go to YouTube and you put in some kind of thing about an African liturgy, and you'll see that's a very lively kind of thing, and long. Not one of the last things that I went to before I was transferred was, there was a bishop who was transferred from one diocese to another. So for the Mass in which he began his ministry, we say his installation Mass, it lasted 6 hours. So we were 4 hours with the Mass itself and 2 hours of speeches. Because one of the things that is very common in Africa is that after communion, you have, prohlasini, you have the, announcements. So there they have, every bishop is invited to get up to speak, the politicians are invited to get up to speak, family members. So the Mass in itself was 4 hours, the speeches were 2. So we were 6 hours on the altar, so. Now that was an extreme case, that was the most, but as the liturgical style, it was very lively. There's a lot of hand clapping and moving, and when when we come in for anything, there are always the groups of children who lead the procession, and they dance as they come in. So it's a very different style of liturgy in different places. When I was in Latin America, or I spent, when I was in Jordan, they discovered that there is a French community, and they discovered that I know enough French to be able to celebrate Mass. So for 2 years I was the chaplain of the French-speaking community in Amman. So you learn the different traditions, the Italian tradition of liturgy, the Spanish language, the French language, a bit of the Arabic, and of course I was here, I knew the traditions here, and then I learned the African traditions. So, it's one of the things that and there are so many places that I have visited. If you think of the Pacific Islands, and if you see how beautiful, some of those places are. I lived in New Zealand, although they're old now. The Lord of the Rings films were made, it's 20 years ago now. But if you see them, there you'll see also one of the stars of the movie, not just the actors and actresses, but the landscape, because it's a beautiful place. So yes, it is.
We know that you used to serve the Mass also in Swahili. Can you tell us something in Swahili?
Yes. If I remember now, I can sing Bwana Bwana utuhurumi. It's Spanish music. Bwana Bwana utuhurumi. Bwana 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 utuhurumi. And then Christe utuhurumi. I learned how to celebrate Mass, but right now I can't think of a single word to say. That happens in the Kwajina la Baba wa la Mwana la Roho Mutakatifu Amina.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency.
So I was able to, I had to do it carefully, but I learned how to celebrate Mass in Kiswahili. I also learned how to do a little bit in Arabic, which was useful in South Sudan, because South Sudan was part of Sudan, and it's an Arab country, and it was their national language. But Arabic is much more difficult than others, yes.
Our distance from Belgrade to New Zealand, when you were sent to, is around 18,000 kilometers.
Yeah.
So there is not only geographical distance, but also cultural. You've been to many places. How spiritual life at such places can be inspiring for us in Central Europe?
Well, New Zealand, to use that one as an example, also has certain similarities. It's a small country in the sense, 250,000 square kilometers, with 5 million people. And it's also a country in which there is not a great deal of religious faith. more than half the population, when they do the annual, every 5 years, there is a census, right, that they don't have any interest in religion or they don't believe, more than half the country. There is the expression, life is good, so you don't need God. So that's New Zealand and Australia, that's often how people think. So there are certain similarities, because there are people who were telling me that when I came here to the Czech Republic, coming to a place where religion is not very important. They even say, "Oh, you're going to the most atheistic country in Europe." So I said, "Well, I don't really care, to tell you the truth. I'll do my job. I'll do what I'm supposed to do, and we work hard at it." So when from the other countries you can bring, certainly in Africa, you do have a certain sense of the presence of the divine in everything. So it's a very common thing, even in public circumstances. The installation, the ceremonies of the president and things like that, to begin things with a prayer. So you have that aspect. So there are different ways in which faith is lived in different places that can be of some assistance. When they asked me, before I left to Nairobi, what would I bring to the Czech Republic? I said, "Well, you sing Svahati Vatslave Vevodo České země." Now we'll have Svahati Vatslave Vevodo. But I don't think that will work if I walk up like that in the cathedral and start moving around like that. I don't know what people will think. So, yes, there are different, how participative liturgy can be. In other places, people sit and watch, or listen. I found in Lithuania, which was a former Soviet republic, as you know, and the church was very heavily persecuted. So people are still really getting over the effects of being part of the Soviet Union for 50 years, and that has certainly had an effect on the way the people worship. There isn't a lot of participation. You pretty much let choirs do everything, and the people don't participate very much. Whereas in Africa, and certainly in Latin America, you have a lot of very active Latin American. They aren't long like in Africa, but still people are very involved. So I think that's also to try to encourage those kinds of things.
And Nuncius is the Latin word for a messenger.
A messenger, yeah.
So what is your current mission? What are your goals here?
Well, my goals are, to serve as best as I can. If you want to say in 2 words, to serve God. That's the fundamental goal. So yes, I see it. So what is the purpose? That is the whole purpose of my life. When I discerned that my vocation, that's what I wanted to do, to serve God as best as I possibly can. And of course, I'm now a little older. I know that the years ahead of me are fewer than the years behind me. And we retire at 75, so it's possible that, I think that I left Prague 20 years ago in 1999, and I will have 20 years from now, will I even be still alive? So my father's 97, so I have a good chance. But in any event, you discover in your priorities what is the thing that is the most important when you see what it is that you have, who it is you are, what is it that you're going to leave behind, so that my mission is to serve God as best as I can, to serve the Holy Father, to be this link between the Holy Father and the Church. When I made this remark about some of the people saying to me about this being an atheistic country, there is the phrase, St. Paul speaks of sowing the seed, that there is someone like the farmer, there is someone who plows the soil. A different person comes and puts the seed, a different person comes and waters, a different person comes and fertilizes, and a different person will come and sort of weed, but God gives the growth. So each one of us makes our own contribution, and I will do what is as best as I can, and not say that, all right, maybe I will not see the fruits, which is something we may not, as Catholics, as Christians, necessarily see the fruits of everything that we do. But since our God's time is very different from our time, God's time is eternal, ours is limited. So we like to see results quickly, but sometimes they don't come that way. We know that each and every one of us has tried to do the best that we are able to do. So that's how I see, to be able to serve, to do what I can to further the love of God in this country.
You talked about Holy Father, and some of the participants was curious, how often do you meet Holy Father?
Oh, well, we are able to ask for an audience to see him every year. With Pope Francis, as I mentioned, I had the opportunity to stay with him for 2 or 3 days there when he came to Nairobi. And then he started a tradition of meeting with all of the nuncios every 3 years. We are about 100 in the world, nunciatures. So in 2013, 2016, and this June, we will have a meeting, all of us, and we will have an opportunity with the Holy Father. And here and there, with going when I went to Rome now, on my way from Nairobi to Prague, I went to just a minute or two, and I reminded him, that I still had interest, to remember to, if he can, to visit South Sudan. But then I said, well, come and visit the Czech Republic. And he smiled without saying anything. On a personal level, a year ago, I was very sick. I had Zlutenka, the hepatitis, very, very serious. And I was out of action for 6 months. I was in the hospital in Nairobi, and I was in Rome for 3.5 months, in the hospital for 3 weeks, and then recovering, because I got 3 for the price of 1, because then they discovered I had a small tumor, and I fell and broke my wrist. So while I was recovering, Pope Francis called me on the phone. Yes, a mobile phone, and it rang, and I picked it up, and it was him. So someone else put the number. I said, here, Holy Father, here's the phone. So, because he's not a very technical person. But he spoke to me, in that sense, and called me and wished me the best, that I would get better, which I did. So I would say, in fact, he will recognize who I am. We laughed a bit when I saw him in November, and I said, come visit the Czech Republic. So I hope he will come, actually. We'll work on it. But yes, I do have the opportunity to meet the Holy Father like that, and I will in June now coming. Yeah.
There's another question. What do you think about Christians in the Czech Republic? Thank you.
Well, you're here. And I'm very happy that you're here. It's good to see, that, because one of the things, I have already been around a bit, visited a number of dioceses, celebrated masses in parishes. I was just in Prague, in one called Svatého it's in Košice, a week from Tanabi, Saint Svatý Gotthard, it's called, it's Prague 6. And I've been to Poličany, they're the Trappist sisters, where they have vocations. I've been around Prague, of course, to so many of these different places, Strahov, and I've celebrated the Easter Vigil with Monsignor Halik in Svatý Salvator. Also, there were more than 40 young adults who were baptized and confirmed, so he did the baptism, I did the confirmation. They have a big crowd there at that church. And I also, celebrated, there was the Mass for the pro-life, the family pro-life march. It was about 2 weeks ago. And St. Vitus Cathedral, which is a big place, was full of young people, families, young families, lots of children. So there is life. Everyone only, you might see so many people are not particularly religious, but my attitude is not to complain about people who are not there, but to give thanks for those who are. And then, you are the ones who will strengthen and continue the life of faith in this country. So.
There is another question that is somehow connected with the previous one. How do you find Czech Catholics so far? Are there any exact differences between Czechs and Catholics from the US?
Oh. Well, one thing I found is that Czech Catholics are very generous. One of the things that I did in that takes place in the mission countries is that every year there is financial aid to be distributed to the Catholic churches, the different dioceses, from what are called the Pontifical Mission Societies. And there is in every country a national director for those. Here it's a deacon, Leos Habelstadt. He is in Hradec Králové. Before that was a Father Jiří Schleger, who was in, what is the name of the place? It's Spindler, that's it. Which is a small place where you can go skiing, I've discovered. But among the countries from which we received money, because we would be given, say, there was $3 million that were to be distributed to the different dioceses and seminaries and things. And money comes from different countries, the United States, Germany, Scotland, but also Czech Republic. So I was very happy to see that, that you are part of this solidarity with the church throughout the world. And seeing from on this side now, when the reports that they send, that actually considering the size of the country and the number of people who come to Mass or participate on a regular basis, people are very generous. Certainly a lot of the worship style is similar. We are Latin Catholic, Latin Rite, but of course you have things here that are far older, than anything in the United States. And the traditions different, as you will have here in Vellerod, pilgrimages and things that have been going on for a long, long time that we don't have. Those are small things.
What did you learn during your journeys about God?
What did I learn in my journeys about God? Well, I found that different ways in which people understand God, different ways in which people worship God, and the fact that we are all made in the image and likeness of God. From that point of view, I've been able to see human beings of all different races and peoples, languages, cultures, all of whom love God. And so I see in that certainly a personal growth from my perspective, how people from everywhere, it's one of the things that keeps us, that unites us, is this fact that is our own love for God, and how God, and I've discovered as I think about my own life and how things have happened, how things have developed, that God has really been there all along, sort of pushing me and encouraging me. I don't know. I do not know if that answers enough the question, but I certainly discovered in my life how people love God and how the hand of God has been along with me from the beginning, really.
Why Nuncius, as a Rome ambassador, have to be priest?
Well, at the present time, not only priest, archbishop. I will see that it is according to since we are working with the bishops, we are called to ordain bishops, ordain priests, and within the church, then the person who is the nuncio, yes, I am an archbishop, and many of the staff are from different. I know, running out of time, probably. What's that?
We still have some time.
Oh, okay. And therefore, the role has always been to have the person since we deal with the bishops, to be on the same level with them. Pope Francis wants to revamp a bit that word, to one of his changes really that's upcoming, also to to broaden the scope, because there are papal representatives who are not necessarily like myself. Many of the, especially the international meetings in multilateral relations, because one of the things that very much interests the Holy See as a, if you will, as an institution, are multilateral relationships. The UN and all of these, European Union, multilateral diplomacy, and very often the people who, because we are, as a rule, promoters of union, not division, so as a rule, there are people of religious lay who are involved in representing the Holy See in these different functions. But up to now, the Nuncio has always been an archbishop. Whether that will continue, we'll leave that in the hands of Pope Francis.
Was Czech humor in a way shocking for you in the beginning?
Was Czech?
Czech jokes, Czech humor.
Well, I don't know the language well enough to understand the jokes. So I can see certain things, if it's printed, I can't tell you who has issued it. There's some kind of calendar, Catholic calendar, that's a bit humorous. Yeah, so I understand those. But if you start telling jokes, I don't understand enough of the language to understand the joke, sorry.
Can you say which country did you like the most? Where did you feel really like at home?
Well, I'll give you a very diplomatic answer, in that I liked every place, which is true. Since I had in a sense, I didn't choose, I was sent. Therefore, why did you go here? Why, for example, why did I go to the Czech Republic and not Slovakia, or Czech Republic and not Austria, or something like that? Because, all of these places I was sent, I've liked them all. If you want to compare, if you want to say which country, New Zealand, for example, the natural beauty is exceptional. As far as a place, you have everything. I enjoyed the Czech Republic partly, it's a beautiful country, but I enjoyed here, learning the language as much as I have. The music, the culture, all that's around you, the architecture, the excellent workmanship. I watched the Mavlastrum Obecný dům on the television. They have the Pražské jaro, and in between, until this was years ago, they were showing how this Obecný dům had been restored. And then you watch the workmanship, the skill, the quality of the workers, how they were just repairing everything. So, which is a quality here, the attention to detail, the hard work. So these different countries, Chile as well was another country which has, from the north to the south, the driest desert in the world down to the ice fields. And when I was in Chile, I had, in '96, in January, which is the summer there, because the seasons are opposite, an opportunity to go on an icebreaker of the Chilean Navy to Antarctica. So I've celebrated Mass in Antarctica in a small chapel. So I also had that opportunity as well. So these are things that I never looked for. I thought I would spend the rest of my life working in a parish in New York, my home diocese. But in the end, I got to see a lot of the world.
Yesterday you mentioned that you quite enjoy Czech cuisine, that you like swimming. How do you relax in your adventurous life?
Well, swimming here is a little bit difficult. When I lived in New Zealand, I lived 5 minutes away from the beach. Here we are, about how many thousand kilometers from the nearest beach? So I used to go, not often, but I used to go. They had a swimming pool close by, but I used to go swimming. But one of the things is that the ocean currents come from Antarctica, so the water was extremely cold in Wellington. But I used to go to the beach. So I don't do so much swimming, but the Czech cuisine, on the other hand, is something that I have practically every day. So I like it very much. I like polevka very much. So sometimes we have it twice a day in the Nuncius, because the sisters who are there who are working with us, they're Czech. Because in some of the nunciatures they may be from other countries, but they are Czech. They belong to the Společnost sester Ježíšových, who are a relatively new group. They are based, their mother house is in Olomouc. Their founder was the Father Robert Kunert, who was in exile, a Czech Jesuit in exile, founded them in Austria. He has just only recently died. The funeral was there. I went in Olomouc in Holy Week. Oh, sorry. So I have plenty of opportunity to have Czech cuisine. I have to be very careful because with my health, I have to watch eating too many knedlíky, so too much starch. Please.
Are there any questions from the audience? I can take one of the mics and go to you.
Well, I see that way, okay. More freely, right? Yes, so it was a written question, it says.
Okay. When you are the current observer for the environment for the United Nations,
yes.
and with all your experience over the world, what's in your point of view the most effective way how to, let's say, stop destroying our environment, especially in the developing country? Thank you.
Well, a lot of it has to do with, yes, I was the permanent observer to the UN. The environment is a big issue. It's from the UN point of view, it's full membership, so all 193 countries are members, and we are observers. Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si has had actually a fairly strong influence on the discussion. So, and it's one of the things that young people can do is to begin to change habits, things like recycling, things like alternative energy sources. Kenya is a producer of solar energy, but also thermal energy because you have what's called the Great Rift Valley. But you have a lot of, because people are poor, they don't always necessarily have the opportunity to do everything. They eat what they have to eat, they do what they have to do. So they really can't, they don't have often many options with regards to, for example, deforestation, cutting down trees, because they have no way to cook, so they cut all the trees down and they make charcoal in order to have something. So it's certainly a greater effort on the part of developed countries to assist developing countries, not just to try and even from our own side to be more attentive to the use of the things. I have seen here, oddly enough, I've seen on the fields there certain areas where you have a lot of solar panels. And you would think here would be difficult because it's so cloudy in different places, but things like that, and to be more attentive to the way in which we use things from a certain perspective that I have from the position in life that I am, meaning my age. You discover what things are important in life. And, not to be preachy, as we say, but you realize, as I said, the years ahead of me are fewer than the years behind. If I collect all sorts of things, where are they going to go? To whom am I going to give all these things? So what Pope Francis is speaking about, materialistic in the sense of acquiring so many things, which is often consuming so much of our resources, is something we need to change. Not that we cannot have a good life in the sense of having what we need, but these are, I don't know if this answers your question in some way, but to be more conscious. I know you have recycling here, but a question I have is, when you recycle, is it recycled? In the sense of, in New Zealand, we did the same, but at a certain point they said, well, we have no place to do, so they just buried some of it. They didn't recycle anything. Is it being done? And even in the United States, they're trying to send plastic away to Asia in order to process the thing. So there are, on a scientific level or a business level, to try to really, what is the best way to use the resources that we have? And in some of the developing countries, they are attentive to that and are trying their best, but we can help. Excuse me. Too much talking. Please.
You've mentioned before that you really enjoy going to concerts in Prague. I was wondering, do you play any musical instrument yourself?
Yes, I play this, YouTube, and, I say I play the button, on, off. Because I love music. I did piano lessons when I was 14, 15, but you see, these do not work very well. So I don't play an instrument, but I love music.
In terms of music during masses, do you prefer organ music, or are you okay with electric guitars, drums, and other electric music?
Well, I'm whatever. In Africa, the music is all percussive. You have certain drums, you have things that make that you shake, or tambourines and things. So there are no organs. There are not even any guitars. In the Pacific Islands, they also like to sing. So whatever instrument, I like organ music, but I also like music with other instruments. You did yesterday. Me personally, I was in high school when that started. We called the folk masses. So I started in the minor seminary when the liturgical reform started. So it was something was part of it. All of these things, so they were enjoyable. So I do, yes, like various instruments. Because I was going to say, because also it allows people to participate. Certainly masses where you have choral style, which is like a concert, they are very beautiful. But it's important for liturgy to be singing along with, because the liturgical principle is that choirs should assist us, not entertain us. The two go together, but yes, I do like all sorts of music. My personal preference, is more classical. I like Renaissance and especially Baroque music. I know that in the Czech Republic, jazz is very, very popular, and that it originated in my home country, but I'm not really a big fan of jazz, to tell you the truth. People ask me who my favorite composer is, and I answer Bieber. So people wonder, Justin Bieber? No, it's Heinrich Ignaz Franz von Bieber, who was a Baroque composer who worked in Olomouc and other places.
Because it's already 10:20, so I'll ask one question that someone you asked. How long are you staying in Prague? Could you stay forever?
Well, I will be 68 in June. We retire at 75, so I'm figuring that this is my last appointment. So I expect that I will be 7 years in Prague, and then I will retire, and I will go back to New York, where my family is. Because one of the things is that even if and this is even true of any bishop or any priest, when we retire in the sense that you're no longer in charge, you are still a priest. So I can still help, celebrate masses, confirmations, baptize, and since I speak, other languages, I can also assist. In the United States, for example, Spanish is widely spoken in so many different places. Since I learned Spanish, I can take the Spanish Mass here and there, so I can be of assistance. And my youngest sister lives in Ithaca, New York, at Central New York State, where you have Cornell University. And there, they don't have so many priests. So my sister said, well, you're retired, coming up and living with us. But that part of New York State, you have the Great Lakes and the Finger Lakes. The winters are long and cold and a lot of snow. And I like winter, so maybe I can spend some time in Manhattan, live in a parish, and then some time living upstate with my sister. So I will stay in Prague for as long as they leave me. They'll forget that I'm here. Let me stay till I retire.
So before you go to New York back, we are honored that you came to Velehrad for the second time in your life, that you spent some time with us, with young graduates, and We are grateful also that you shared some of your wisdom and life experience with us, and we will enjoy definitely talking to you during the day before your train leaves to Prague.
Oh, I have, yes, tomorrow, yes, after Mass, because I have Mass tomorrow. One of the sisters that used to be with us when I was here the first time are the Boromeki. And one of them, she celebrates 70 years as a religious. I'm not sure of her age. She's somewhere, don't ask these questions. But I know that the other sisters say she's somewhere between 95 and 100. So I mean, but 70 years of religious life. So tomorrow I'll have that Mass at the church. They have the hospital there at Prague, right there. The church is there, the Boromeki sisters. So since my name is Charles, and that would be my patron saint, Charles Borromeo. So, and since this country, you know, I was named for my grandfather. I wasn't named for the king, a past king of the Holy Roman Emperor, you know, Carlo IV. But since there are so many Carlos Most, Carlo Università, Carlo Vivari, I feel this is my country, this is my home. It all belongs to me. So, no, I'm happy to be here, to do what I can in the time that I have. So, thank you.
So a big applause to Karel Daniel